Illinois that was in darkness for 6 months out of the year. This was a somewhat obscure and technical joke, especially in these days of endemic geographic ignorance, but people laughed at it anyway because he was the governor. He kept his desk lamp going all day, but as the sky had darkened, and as he worked into the night, he had not bothered to turn on the overhead fixtures, and he now sat in a pool of illumination in the middle of the dark office. Around the edges of the room, innumerable pieces of decoration reflected the light back at him. Each governor decorated the office in his own way. Only a few things were immutable: the preposterous fresco on the ceiling, the massive doors with brass lions' heads mounted in their centers. His predecessor had gone in for a spare, classical 19th century look, filling the place up with antiques that had belonged to Lincoln and Douglas. This impressed visitors and looked nice for the tour groups who came by every hour to launch flash cube barrages over the velvet rope. Cozzano had banned the tour groups, slamming the doors in their faces so that all they could see was the brass lions, and turned the office into a cluttered Cozzano family museum. It had started on the day of his first inauguration, with a small photo of his late wife, Christina, placed on the corner of his historically inaccurate desk. Naturally, photos of his children, Mary Catherine and James, came next. But there was no point in stopping with the immediate family, and so Cozzano had brought in several boxes containing pictures of patriarchs and matriarchs going back several generations. He wanted pictures of his friends, too, and of their families, and he also needed various pieces of memorabilia, some of which were chosen for sentimental reasons, some for purely political ones. By the time Cozzano was finished decorating his office, it was almost filled with clutter. Smelling salts had to be brought in for the Historical Society, and, as he sat down for the first time in his big leather chair, he could trace the entire genealogy and economic development of the Cozzano clan and of 20th century Illinois, which amounted to the same thing. There was an old aerial photograph of Tuscala as seen from its own water tower in the 1930s. It was a town of a few thousand people, about half an hour south of the academic metropolis of Champaign-Urbana and a couple of hours south of Chicago. Even in this photo it was possible to see gaudy vaults in the town cemetery and Duesenbergs cruising the streets. Tuscala was, for a farm town, bizarrely prosperous. In an oval frame of black walnut was a hand-tinted photograph of his great-grandfather and namesake, Guillermo Cozzano, who had come to Illinois from Genoa in 1879. In typically contrary Cozzano fashion, he had bypassed the large Italian communities on the East Coast and found work in a coal mine about 30 miles southwest of Tuscala, where soil and coal were the same color. He and his son Giuseppe had gone into the farming business, snapping up one of the last available parcels of high-quality land. In 1912, Giuseppe and his wife had their first child, Giovanni, John Cozzano, followed 3 and 5 years later by Thomas and Peter. All of these events were recorded in photographs, which Cozzano would be more than happy to explain to visitors if they made the mistake of expressing curiosity or even allowing their eyes to stray in that direction. Most of the photos featured buildings, babies, or weddings. John Cozzano, photo, lost his mother to influenza at the age of 6, and from that point onward lived his life as if he had been shot from a cannon. During his high school years in the vigorous 1920s, he held down a part-time job at the local grain elevator, photo. By the time economic disasters struck in the 1930s, he had worked his way up into the management of that business. With one foot in his father's farm and the other in the grain elevator, John was able to get the family through the Depression in one piece. In 1933, John fell in love with Francesca Dominici, a young Chicago woman.